Sophia Martinez gripped the weathered leather wallet in her shaking hands, recounting the coins for the third time. The morning hustle at Chicago's downtown cafe swirled around her, but she barely registered the noise. Her fingers brushed over each quarter and dime, totaling exactly $2.75, just enough for a small coffee to power her through another grueling day. The sleepless night was etched on her face, dark circles under her green eyes telling the story of endless hours spent stitching custom dresses for her growing tailoring business. At 29, she bore the weight of single motherhood with quiet resolve, though some days felt more burdensome than others. This morning, after dropping her 7-year-old son Max at daycare, the familiar knot of anxiety had settled in her stomach again. "Next customer, please," called the barista, her voice snapping Sophia out of her thoughts. As she stepped forward, the coins pressed into her palm. Sophia noticed a man standing behind her in line. Something about him caught her attention, perhaps the impeccably tailored navy suit or the warm expression in his deep blue eyes. He was typing on his phone, but she could feel his occasional glance in her direction. "Just a small coffee, please," Sophia said softly, already placing the counted coins on the counter. Her cheeks flushed slightly, aware of how long she'd taken to count out the exact change. "Wait!" A warm voice called from behind her. The well-dressed man stepped forward, his presence both commanding and gentle. "Add a breakfast sandwich to the lady's order, and I'll have a large latte." Before Sophia could protest, already handed his credit card to the barista. "Oh, no. Please, you don't have to," she began. But he smiled, and something about that smile seemed hauntingly familiar. "I insist," he said. "Everyone deserves a proper breakfast." As they waited for their orders, he introduced himself. "I'm Ethan Walker," he said, studying her face with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You know, this might sound strange, but you look incredibly familiar." Sophia shifted nervously, clutching her wallet. "I'm Sophia Martinez." "And thank you, really, but you didn't have to." "Martinez?" Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "Did you used to live on Elm Street, house number 315? The question stopped Sophia in her tracks. Memories flooded back. A little boy next door with scraped knees and a missing front tooth, sharing ice cream on hot summer days. "Ethan? Little Ethan Walker from next door?" His face broke into a broad grin. "The very same, though I hope I've grown up a bit since then." Sophia couldn't believe it. 22 years had passed since the Walkers had moved away, leaving her 6-year-old self heartbroken at losing her best friend. Now here he stood, transformed from the scrappy kid who used to chase fireflies with her into the successful-looking man. As they collected their orders, Ethan gestured to a small table by the window. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd love to catch up." Sophia glanced at her watch. She should head to her tiny tailoring shop, but something made her nod. "A few minutes," she agreed, over coffee and the sandwich she wouldn't have been able to afford. Sophia found herself opening up about the past years, her failed marriage to Max's father, who had abandoned them for years ago, her struggles to build her tailoring business, and her dreams of launching her own clothing line someday. Ethan listened intently, his coffee forgotten. He shared his own story, building a tech company from scratch, its recent successful sale to a major corporation, and his fresh start after a difficult divorce. What he didn't mention was just how successful that sale had been, or the complex custody battle he was still fighting with his ex-wife over their shared property. As Sophia described Max's latest artistic masterpiece, a crayon drawing of their small apartment filled with balloons, Ethan's phone buzzed repeatedly. He glanced at it with a frown. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked, noting his changed expression. "Just my ex-wife," he said, declining the call. "She's, having trouble accepting the divorce terms." He paused, then added carefully, "Sophia, I know this might seem forward, but would you consider having dinner with me tonight? For old time's sake." Sophia's heart raced. The practical part of her mind reminded her of all the reasons to say no. The daycare pickup, the alterations waiting in her shop, the vast difference in their current lives. But something in Ethan's warm eyes, something that reminded her of shared childhood secrets and innocent friendship, made her want to say yes. Before she could answer, the cafe door burst open. A striking woman in designer clothes stormed toward their table, her face twisted with anger. "So this is why you're not answering my calls, Ethan?" she spat, her eyes raking over Sophia with undisguised contempt. Sophia felt her cheeks burn as other customers turned to stare. Ethan stood quickly, his expression hardening. "Amanda, this is completely inappropriate. We're divorced. You can't keep doing this." The woman, Amanda, laughed bitterly. "Divorced? The ink isn't even dry on the papers, and you're already slumming it with—" "That's enough." Ethan cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. "Sophia is a childhood friend, not that it's any of your business. Please leave, or I'll have security escort you out." Sophia stood, gathering her things with trembling hands. "I should go," she whispered. "Thank you for the coffee and everything." As she hurried toward the door, she heard Ethan calling her name, but she couldn't turn back. The morning sun hit her face as she stepped outside, and she took a deep breath trying to steady herself. What had she been thinking? Their worlds were too different now. She was halfway down the block when she heard rapid footsteps behind her. "Sophia, wait!" Ethan called out. "Please don't let Amanda ruin this. At least let me explain." Sophia stopped, her hand clutching her wallet where those carefully counted coins still waited. A reminder of the reality of her world, a world that seemed very far from Ethan Walker's complicated life. Sophia's heart pounded as she turned to face Ethan. The morning sun caught his worried expression, and for a moment she saw a flash of that little boy from her childhood, the one who had always tried to make things right. "Can we talk quieter?" Ethan asked, gesturing to a small park across the street. "I owe you an explanation, and there's so much I want to ask you." Against her better judgment, Sophia nodded. They found a bench away from the morning commuters, where autumn leaves danced around their feet. Ethan loosened his tie, suddenly looking less like a polished businessman and more like someone carrying a heavy burden. "Amanda and I," he began, running a hand through his dark hair. "Our divorce has been complicated. She's having trouble accepting that it's over. When I sold my company 6 months ago, things got worse. She's convinced herself that I planned the timing to affect the settlement." Sophia listened, her fingers absently tracing the worn edges of her wallet. "It must be difficult," she offered quietly, thinking of her own failed marriage, though her ex-husband had simply walked away, leaving her with nothing but bills and broken promises. "The truth is," Ethan continued, his voice softening, "seeing you this morning brought back so many memories. Do you remember that tree house your dad built us, the one with the secret compartment in the floor?" A smile tugged at Sophia's lips. "Where we hid our treasure map. Dad helped us make it look old by staining it with tea. And we buried that time capsule in your backyard," Ethan added, his eyes lighting up, "with my favorite Matchbox car and your mother's costume jewelry. Those were the happiest days of my childhood. Sophia, everything felt possible then." "I dug it up," Sophia admitted, surprising herself. "After you moved away, I was so angry that you left without saying goodbye. I took the car but reburied everything else. I still have it, actually. The car. It's silly, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." Ethan's face fell. "I wanted to say goodbye. That morning when my parents rushed us into the car, my father had lost his job, and we were about to lose the house. They didn't want anyone to know. I begged to see you one last time." Sophia felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I waited at my window every day for weeks, hoping you'd come back. Mom tried to explain that you'd moved far away, but I kept believing you'd return. I wrote you letters," Ethan revealed, moving closer on the bench. "Dozens of them, but my mother, she thought it would be easier if we made a clean break. She never mailed them. I found them years later in a box in her attic. She'd kept them all." A young mother walked by with a little girl about Max's age, sending a jolt of reality through Sophia. The little girl's giggles echoed across the park, reminding her of her own responsibilities. "I should get to work," she said, standing up. "My clients are waiting." "Your tailoring shop? Where is it?" Ethan asked, also rising. "Maybe I could stop by later." "See your—" Sophia hesitated. Her tiny studio above the Italian restaurant was a far cry from the world Ethan now inhabited. The familiar shame crept in, the same feeling she got when other parents saw her dropping Max off at daycare in her beat-up car. "It's not much," she said softly. "Just a small place on Oak Street." "I'd love to see it," he insisted. Then more carefully, "Sophia, about dinner tonight. I understand if you'd rather not, after what happened with Amanda, but I'd really like a chance to catch up properly, to hear about your life, your son." Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a text from the daycare. Max had a fever. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, gathering her bag. "It's my son. He's sick. I have to go." "Let me drive you," Ethan offered immediately. "Please, it's the least I can do." Sophia started to refuse, but another text made her phone buzz urgently. Looking at the screen, her heart sank. Max's temperature was rising, and the daycare needed her to come immediately. "Okay," she conceded. "Thank you." Ethan's car, a sleek black BMW, stood out starkly against the weathered buildings of downtown Chicago. As they drove to the daycare, Sophia couldn't help but notice how naturally Ethan asked about Max, showing genuine concern. It was so different from her ex-husband, who had barely acknowledged their son's existence even before he left. At the daycare, Sophia rushed inside while Ethan waited in the car. She emerged carrying a flushed and teary-eyed Max, who clung to her mother's neck. To Sophia's surprise, Ethan had already cleared the back seat, laying his suit jacket down as a makeshift pillow. "My apartment on Lincoln Avenue," Sophia said hesitantly, knowing it was in the opposite direction from the wealthy areas where Ethan likely lived. "Just tell me where to go," he said simply, adjusting the car's temperature when he noticed Max shivering. As they drove, Sophia caught him watching in the rear-view mirror, his expression softening whenever Max whimpered. Sophia stroked Max's hair, worrying about the clients she'd have to cancel and the income she'd lose. A particularly expensive bridesmaid's dress alteration was due tomorrow, and she had barely started it. The bride had already paid half the fee, money Sophia had used for Max's new winter coat. "Here," Sophia said finally, pointing to a worn brick building. She expected Ethan to simply drop them off, but he was already parking the car. "Let me help you get him inside," he insisted, opening Sophia's door before she could protest. His hand brushed her arm as he helped her out, sending an unexpected warmth through her body. As they climbed the narrow stairs to her second-floor apartment, Sophia was acutely aware of the peeling wallpaper, the faint smell of garlic from the restaurant below, the general shabbiness she usually tried to ignore. But Ethan showed no reaction, focusing instead on carrying Max's backpack and asking the little boy gentle questions about how he felt. Inside the small apartment, Sophia's face burned as she noticed the breakfast dishes still in the sink, the basket of unfolded laundry on the couch. But Max's fever was rising, and those concerns had to wait. "The bathroom's through there," Sophia directed, pointing. "Could you wet a washcloth with cool water?" Ethan moved through her tiny apartment with surprising ease, returning with not just a washcloth, but also a glass of water and the children's Tylenol he'd spotted on the counter. "Has Max settled on the pull-out couch that served as his bed?" She noticed Ethan taking in the crayon drawings covering the fridge, the small sewing machine set up in the corner, the carefully mended curtains that couldn't quite hide their age. His phone buzzed again. It had been buzzing periodically throughout their drive. This time, Sophia caught a glimpse of the screen, a message from Amanda. "Your lawyer can't protect you forever. I know about the offshore accounts. Don't think you can hide them." Ethan quickly silenced the phone, but Sophia had seen enough. The distance between their worlds suddenly felt vast again. Here she was, worrying about making rent, while Ethan dealt with offshore accounts and legal battles with his wealthy ex-wife. "I should go," Ethan said quietly, reading her expression. "But Sophia, please don't let this morning be the end. There's something I never told you, something I've regretted not saying since that last day on Elm Street." Sophia looked up from Max's feverish face, her heart skipping at the intensity in Ethan's eyes. But before he could continue, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the peephole, Sophia saw Amanda, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon, her face set in grim determination. Somehow she had followed them. Behind her, Sophia heard Ethan sharp intake a breath. "Don't open it," he whispered, his hand finding Sophia's shoulder. Please, there's something you need to know. Sophia's hand trembled on the doorknob as Amanda knocked again, harder this time. The sound echoed through the small apartment, making Max whimper on the couch. Sophia, Ethan said urgently, his voice barely above a whisper. Amanda isn't just angry about the divorce. She's desperate because she knows I discovered her embezzlement from my company. She's been stealing for years, hiding money in accounts I didn't know about. When I found out, she tried to blame it on my CFO, but I have proof. That's the real reason for our divorce. Before Sophia could process this revelation, Amanda's voice cut through the door. I can hear you in there. Ethan, your car's outside. Do you really want to make a scene? Because I will. Sophia glanced at Max, who was watching the door with wide, frightened eyes. Making a decision, she stepped into the hallway, closing the apartment door behind her to face Amanda alone. This has nothing to do with me or my son, Sophia said firmly, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Please leave. Amanda's perfectly made-up face twisted into a sneer. Oh, it has everything to do with you. Did he tell you about our reconciliation dinner last week? How he begged me to come back. She pulled out her phone, showing Sophia photos of her and Ethan at an upscale restaurant. Sophia's heart sank, but before she could respond, Ethan emerged from the apartment. Those photos are from 2 months ago, the dinner where you tried to convince me to fire James if he testified about the missing funds. Stop trying to manipulate everyone around you. Amanda's composure cracked. You ungrateful bastard. I helped build that company. Those accounts were insurance for our future. If you go through with this, You'll what? A new voice interrupted. They all turned to see an older woman climbing the stairs, her silver hair elegant despite the humid day. Still causing trouble, Amanda? Ethan's eyes widened. Mom, what are you doing here? Margaret Walker straightened her designer blazer as she reached their landing. When you missed our breakfast meeting, I had your office ping your phone. Imagine my surprise when it led me here. Her eyes fell on Sophia, and she gasped softly. Little Sophia Martinez, is it really you? Sophia nodded, stunned by this new arrival. Margaret had aged gracefully, but she was unmistakably the same woman who used to bring cookies to their treehouse all those years ago. Amanda attempted to regain control. Margaret, how nice. We were just discussing how you're leaving. Margaret cut in smoothly. Now, before I call the fraud investigators myself, she turned to Sophia. I apologize for my former daughter-in-law's behavior. Some people never learn grace, no matter how many finishing schools they attend. Amanda's face flushed red. She opened her mouth to argue, but Margaret's unwavering stare made her think better of it. With a final glare at Ethan, she turned and clicked her way down the stairs in her expensive heels. Mom, Ethan began, but Margaret held up a hand. First, let's check on that sick child I heard crying. Then we can talk about why you didn't tell me you'd found Sophia. Inside the apartment, Margaret went straight to Max, her stern demeanor melting as she knelt beside the couch. Hello, sweetheart. I'm Ethan's mommy. Would you like to hear a story about when he was little and got sick? As Margaret entertained Max with tales of young Ethan's chicken pox adventures, Sophia pulled Ethan into her tiny kitchen. Your mother? She's so different from what I remember. Ethan leaned against the counter, their shoulders almost touching in the cramped space. After Dad passed away, she changed, went back to school, got her MBA. She's been my company's CFO for the past 5 years. That's how we caught Amanda's embezzlement. Mom noticed discrepancies in the accounts. Why didn't you tell me about Amanda's embezzlement at the cafe? Sophia asked, her voice trembling. I want to protect you from all this mess, Ethan admitted, turning to face her fully. But seeing you again, he paused, taking a deep breath. Sophia, remember when I said I had something to tell you? Something I regretted not saying that last day. Sophia's heart raced as Ethan took her hand. From the living room, they could hear Max giggling at Margaret's story. I had a crush on you, Ethan confessed. Even at 6 years old, I knew you were special. The day we moved, I left something in that time capsule. A note. Did you ever find it? Sophia shook her head, remembering how she'd been too upset to thoroughly check the contents when she dug it up. It said, "I love Sophia. I'm going to marry her someday." "Childish, I know," he chuckled softly. "But when I saw you this morning, counting those coins, that same feeling came rushing back. That need to take care of you, to be near you." "Ethan," Sophia whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I'm not telling you this to pressure you. I know our lives are complicated, but I want you to know that my feelings are real. They always have been." A crash from outside made them jump apart. In the living room, they found Margaret standing protectively over Max, staring at the window. A brick lay among shattered glass on the floor, a note wrapped around it. Ethan grabbed the note, his face darkening as he read. "Amanda's threatening to go to the press. She says she has evidence that I've been laundering money. But that's not true." "Of course not," Sophia protested. "Of course not," Margaret said calmly. "But she's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." Max began to cry, frightened by the breaking glass and tension in the room. Sophia rushed to comfort him, but as she passed the window, she noticed the red dancing on her wall, a laser sight. "Everyone down." Ethan shouted, lunging forward to tackle Sophia and Max to the floor as a shot rang out, shattering another window. In the chaos that followed, as sirens wailed in the distance and Margaret called the police, Sophia held Max close and met Ethan's eyes. In that moment, she realized that her simple life had been forever changed, and the little boy who once shared her treehouse might now be the only person who could help her survive what was coming. "Trust me," Ethan whispered, his arms still protective around them both. "I won't let anything happen to you, either of you. And despite everything, the danger, the complications, the vast differences in their lives," Sophia found herself believing him. The next few hours passed in a blur of police sirens, detective interviews, and crime scene photographers documenting the shattered windows. Sophia sat in a corner of her apartment, holding Max close as he slept, exhausted from fever and fear. The police had confirmed what they already suspected. The shot had come from the building across the street, but the shooter was long gone. Margaret had taken charge of the situation with remarkable efficiency, coordinating with both the police and her private security team. Now she sat beside Sophia, her hand occasionally reaching out to smooth Max's hair. "You know," Margaret said softly, "I've regretted moving away from Elm Street every day since. When I saw those letters Ethan wrote you, I should have mailed them. Maybe things would have been different." Ethan returned from speaking with the detectives, his tie long discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up. "They found Amanda's car abandoned at O'Hare," he reported. "She's used her passport. They think she's headed to the Cayman Islands. Where the accounts are," Margaret added grimly. "I've already frozen everything we could trace, but she had time to move some funds. The good news is we have enough evidence of the embezzlement to ensure she won't get away with it." Sophia looked around her apartment, now crowded with law enforcement and crime technicians. The bridesmaid's dress she needed to alter hung forgotten on her sewing rack, the deadline now impossible to meet. Her whole life seemed to be unraveling. "You can't stay here tonight," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "It's not safe. Mom's already arranged for us to use the company's secure apartment in Lincoln Park." "Us?" Sophia asked, her voice wavering. "All of us," Margaret confirmed, "including Max. Ethan's right. You need protection until Amanda is found." Sophia thought of her tiny shop, her clients, her responsibilities. "I can't just leave. I have work and Max's school." "Sophia," Ethan said gently, taking her free hand, "let's help you, please. I've already lost you once. I can't bear the thought of anything happening to you or Max." Looking into his eyes, Sophia saw not just the wealthy businessman he'd become, but also the little boy who had once promised to protect her from imaginary dragons in their treehouse. Some things, it seemed, never changed. As they prepared to leave, Sophia packed a small bag for herself and Max. Her son stirred, looking up with fever-bright eyes. "Mommy, are we going on an adventure?" Sophia smiled, fighting back tears. "Yes, sweetheart, just for a little while." The company apartment turned out to be a luxurious penthouse with panoramic views of the city. Under different circumstances, Sophia might have felt overwhelmed by its grandeur, but tonight she was simply grateful for the security team stationed discreetly throughout the building. As she tucked Max in one of the guest rooms, the little boy asked drowsily, "Is Mr. Ethan your prince, like in my stories?" Sophia brushed her son's hair back, checking his temperature. The fever was finally breaking. "It's complicated, sweetie." "But he looks at you like a prince," Max insisted, drifting off to sleep. Later that night, Sophia stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle below. Ethan joined her, offering a cup of tea. "Mom's gone to meet with the FBI," he said. "They're optimistic about tracking Amanda down quickly. She's left quite a paper trail." Sophia turned to face him. "Why didn't you tell me about the embezzlement sooner? I didn't want to drag you into this mess. When I saw you this morning, you were like a dream come true, a second chance I never thought I'd get. I was afraid if I told you everything, you'd run. Instead, someone shot at us," Sophia said with a hint of irony. Ethan winced. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I never imagined Amanda would go this far. But I promise you, once we find her—" "Ethan," Sophia interrupted, "why did you really come to that cafe this morning?" He looked surprised. "I told you it was a coincidence." "Was it? In a city of nearly 3 million people?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, then reached for his phone. He pulled up a photo, an old newspaper clipping from 3 years ago. It showed Sophia at a small fashion show, standing proudly beside a rack of altered vintage dresses. "I never stopped thinking about you," he admitted. "Over the years, I'd search your name online, hoping to find some trace. When I saw this article, I knew you were still in Chicago. I'd go to that cafe every morning, hoping to run into you, for 6 months." Sophia stared at him, her heart pounding. 6 months? "I knew it was your neighborhood. I couldn't bring myself to track you down directly. It felt too intrusive. But I couldn't stay away either. So this morning, when you saw me counting change, it took everything I had not to sweep you into my arms right there." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "Sophia, I know this isn't how either of us imagined reconnecting. But maybe it's exactly what needed to happen. All the barriers between us, time, money, circumstance, they don't matter anymore. What matters is that after 22 years, my heart still recognizes yours." Sophia thought of the little boy who had written, "I'm going to marry her someday," and buried it in a time capsule. She thought of the man who had spent 6 months hoping to see her again, and she thought of how natural it had felt, watching him care for Max today. "When Amanda's caught," she said slowly, "and all this is over, what then?" "Then," Ethan smiled, "I'd like to take you on a proper date. No ex-wives, no gunshots, no fever-stricken children. Just us getting to know each other and maybe—" Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a battered Matchbox car. "Maybe we could bury this again together, start fresh," he said. Sophia recognized it instantly, the car she kept all these years. He must have seen it on her bedroom shelf earlier. "How did you—" "Some treasures," Ethan said softly, "are worth keeping close." 3 months later, on a crisp winter morning, Sophia stood in her newly expanded boutique on Michigan Avenue. The sign above the door read, "Sophia's Vintage Revivals," and the windows displayed her own designs alongside her alteration work. The charges against Amanda had stuck. She was awaiting trial after being caught in Grand Cayman, and Ethan's company had not only recovered but thrived under his and Margaret's leadership. The bell above the door chimed, and Sophia looked up to see Ethan and Max entering, both carrying mysterious boxes. "Ready for lunch?" Ethan asked, kissing her cheek. "Almost," Sophia smiled. "What's in the boxes?" Max bounced excitedly. "It's a surprise for the treehouse." Sophia raised an eyebrow at Ethan, who shrugged innocently. "Well, every home needs a treehouse, even if that home happens to be a brownstone in Lincoln Park." As Sophia locked up the boutique, she touched a small velvet box in her pocket. Her own surprise for later. Inside was a Matchbox car, carefully restored, with a note that read, "*Want to share a treehouse forever?" She already knew his answer.